Good evening from Warsaw, Poland. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight. Poland and France are on the same page on the issue of European security and a just peace in Ukraine, said Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk after a meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron. More on that in just a moment, but first let's take a look at the latest headlines. Donald Trump reacts to the use of American-supplied long-range missiles in Ukraine. Romania and Bulgaria will join the Schengen free travel zone on January 1st. After overthrowing the Assad regime, Syrians are looking for news of their missing loved ones in notorious Sednaya prison near Damascus. Peace in Ukraine must be lasting and negotiated by Ukrainians. That was the message from French President Emmanuel Macron as he met with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Warsaw today. It comes as Europe faces pressure from the incoming Donald Trump administration to bring peace to the region. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Damon, has more.
This was a meeting of like minds, of friends, of two leaders who are pitching to play peace brokers in Ukraine. Just this weekend, French President Emmanuel Macron, even as his own government is falling apart around him, managed to get himself, Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump in the same room. The issues at hand in that trilateral meeting were, of course, also on the agenda in the heart of Warsaw today. Here's what President Macron told us.
We need to work closely with the US, of course, in close contact with Ukraine, to find a solution that takes into account the interests of Ukraine and its sovereignty.
President Macron also raised the issue of elections in Central Eastern Europe, especially Russian meddling.
Here in Europe, we are not naive. We are increasingly witnessing manipulation, hybrid attacks, and disinformation from entities linked to Russia.
Ahead of this meeting, an EU diplomatic source told TVP World that the pair would also discuss the possibility of a peacekeeping mission, a peacekeeping force to Ukraine. So, did they come to an agreement? Here's Prime Minister Tusk.
I would like to put an end to speculation about the potential presence of this or that country in Ukraine after a ceasefire is achieved. Decisions regarding Poland's actions will be made in Warsaw and only in Warsaw. For now, we do not plan such actions.
Following his meeting with Prime Minister Tusk and the announcement that Poland and France will sign a mutual friendship treaty next year, it was time for Macron to head to the presidential palace and sit down with Polish President Andrzej Duda. With so much uncertainty both in the region and around the world, these exercises of diplomacy are more important than ever. In Warsaw for TVP World, I'm Aaron Darman.
President Macron's visit to Poland highlights Warsaw's growing role in Europe. The upcoming Polish presidency in the Council of the European Union will be both a challenge and an opportunity for the Polish government to show what's it made of. Can it live up to the expectations? Kazimierz Łysiak reports.
In less than 20 days, Poland will be setting the tone in the Council of the European Union. Taking over the presidency means choosing the topics of discussions between EU ministers for the next 6 months. That's an opportunity to build a stronger position in the bloc.
And also the visibility of Poland will be significant. We will be holding in Poland some 22 ministerial councils and meetings, and also some 300 official meetings holding 40,000 guests.
French President Emmanuel Macron was all smiles when visiting Warsaw on Thursday, but back home he has little reason to be in a festive mood. Prime Minister Michel Barnier was ousted earlier this month, following a no-confidence vote that plunged France into a major political crisis. Another key player in Europe, Germany, is waiting for snap elections in late February after the ruling coalition fell apart over budget disagreements. This leaves Poland with a challenge, but also a chance to lead.
There is a position of leadership that is lacking, and actually Polish presidency might try to step in a way, to fill this position.
Security Europe, that's the slogan of the Polish presidency and the Council, and energy security will be one of the most important aspects of Poland's time at the helm, specifically cutting dependence on Russian imports and lowering prices for consumers.
Individual countries need solutions tailored to them, but there are also mechanisms for joint solutions on lowering the prices of energy.
Because of the prices of energy in Europe that are higher than the United States, this actually prevents us to being as competitive as we can be.
It's been a year since the formation of the new center-liberal government in Poland, led by Donald Tusk. The country is now in a much different place when it comes to its position on the international stage.
Poland moving from being a security consumer to a security provider, they're going to have the biggest and probably the most capable land force in mainland Europe. And I think for a lot of countries, France, Germany, that's going to be a new reality that takes some getting used to be honest.
Poland plans to spend close to 4.7% of its GDP on defense in 2025, the highest number in all of NATO. US President-elect Donald Trump, who will return to office in January, has already said he will be expecting other European countries to take more responsibility for their defense as well.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski is on a visit to Berlin, where he met his counterparts from Europe's Big Five. Officials from the UK and the EU are also attending the talks focused on keeping the continent safe in the face of threats from Russia.
After the Big Five's last meeting, held in Warsaw, called by Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, it's now Berlin's turn to host the bloc's foreign ministers, invited by Germany's Annalena Baerbock. Among them are also UK Minister of State for Europe Stephen Doughty, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine Andriy Sybiha, and Kaja Kallas, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy.
Ukraine needs hard security guarantees. We as Europeans need hard security guarantees that do not show any breakages. This includes long-term military and financial support for Ukraine.
Europe's Big Five is a group comprised of Poland, Germany, Spain, Italy and France.
Putin's aggressive war is a threat not just to Ukraine, but to the established order in Europe, which it is. Putin broke the taboo established by the two bloody world wars. He's trying to change borders by force.
While these items often top the agendas of international meetings, the approach to Europe's support for Ukraine is about to change dramatically due to a slight change in management on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. With Trump's imminent takeover of the White House slated for late January 2025, Warsaw is of the opinion that Europe should work on creating a unified front with Washington when it comes to both European defense and aid to Ukraine.
I think it's imperative that the EU, in terms of Ukraine, steps up and does that on their own, because this fight is not going to go away. Ukraine is a starting point for Putin, and he'll keep taking as much as he can.
Experts say that given the short time frame in which the first two meetings took place, it's possible that the next meeting of Europe's Big Five will be held shortly.
President-elect Donald Trump has lashed out at the use of American-supplied long-range missiles in Ukraine as the clock counts down to his return to the White House. It comes as the Time magazine names the president-elect Person of the Year, his second such distinction in less than a decade. Aisha Badji has this report.
It starts with a B, but I won't say it. I want to say it.
Donald Trump certainly left his mark on 2024 with his comeback to the White House. And now, in an interview for Time magazine, the president-elect has some sharp comments on President Biden's recent decision to provide long-range missiles to Ukraine.
It's crazy what's taking place. It's crazy. I disagree very vehemently with sending missiles hundreds of miles into Russia. Why are we doing that? We're just escalating this war and making it worse. That should not have been allowed to be done.
We have wars going on that we didn't have. We have a lot of things happening that we didn't have that would have never happened. They would have never happened, but now they have happened. And I want to get them solved. We have to get them solved because ultimately the power of weaponry today is the biggest threat we have, in my opinion.
In the extended interview where he was nominated Person of the Year, he also tempers expectations about a swift end to the war in Ukraine.
I think that the Middle East is an easier problem to handle than what's happening with Russia and Ukraine.
Since Trump mentioned his intent to resolve the conflict in 24 hours, European leaders have been united in their message that the war needs to end on Ukraine's terms. That message was reinforced today in Berlin by Kaja Kallas, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy.
We have to do more to strengthen Ukraine on the battlefield. The stronger they are on the battlefield, the stronger they are behind negotiation table. And of course, it's up to Ukraine to say when they are ready to sit around any negotiation table.
I have to say, Time Magazine getting this honor for the second time, I think I like it better this time, actually. Because
Trump celebrated his second Person of the Year title at the New York Stock Exchange. But this time around, it's not all big smiles and handshakes from Mr. Trump, as he has a lot of promises to deliver on.
The EU's Home Affairs ministers convened in Brussels on Thursday to address a range of topics, including the status of the EU migration and asylum pact in light of the ongoing situation in Syria. A key milestone emerged from the meeting. The ministers approved Romania and Bulgaria's accession to the Schengen free travel zone. This decision will enable the removal of land border checks starting January 1st of 2025. European Affairs correspondent Sasha Farbach brings us more in his report.
Fully in Schengen, that's where you belong. Those are the words today of Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, on the news that Home Affairs ministers gave that final green light in Council in their monthly meeting in Brussels that Romania and Bulgaria would now become fully fledged members of the Schengen free travel zone. Now, up until March, it was only possible partially that they were members of Schengen, only through air transport. And now those border checks and also now everything else will fall away starting on the 1st of January in 2025. Now, if we go back, 2011 is actually when the European Commission had said that Romania and Bulgaria were ready for this, that they were set to join. This was delayed, a roadblock was put in place. Several countries raised concern, and particularly at the end in 2023 was Austria and also the Netherlands, who ultimately blocked Romania and Bulgaria from joining the Schengen zone, citing illegal migration and generally migration concerns, that there would still needed to be steps that needed to be taken. Now, those have been fulfilled at a meeting in Budapest, and Romanians, also MEPs, have said that for sure this is now something Romania can take care of. Romania is ready to protect the external borders.
Romania is being presented as an example to other member states on how to protect its external borders. I can point out, for instance, to the efforts that we did in order to increase our border securities with Serbia, and this has been presented as being a good, positive example of what Europe can do together.
Finally, good and necessary news for all the Romanian citizens, for those from the country, but also from those from diaspora, because the last month the pro-extremist votes was based in a large measure exactly to this frustration that they consider themselves as being seen by the Europeans as the second-rank citizens.
This is also a step that actually during the Romanian elections recently was a point that the far-right extremists had raised, that this is not something that Europe had done enough of for the Romanians, seeing them as second tier, but ultimately now this has been pushed through, and this is going to give a lot of points for the European project for Romania, but also across Europe. That's Sasha Farbach in Brussels for TVP World.
Yesterday, Ingrida Šimonytė's cabinet met for the last time. Today, the new Lithuanian Prime Minister Gintautas Paluckas is taking over the office. For more on this, here's our report from our Vilnius correspondent, Yevgeny Rusakov.
We are outside the Lithuanian government building in the center of Vilnius. From this day and for the next 4 years, the new Lithuanian Prime Minister Gintautas Paluckas will sit here. This afternoon, the Lithuanian Parliament approved the program of the 19th Lithuanian government, after which the Cabinet of Ministers took the oath of office. According to the program, the new government will pursue a constructive and predictable foreign policy, ensure the protection of the population from external threats, and fully support Ukraine. The government program promises funding of at least 3.5% of GDP and military advice. Particular attention is to be paid to the deployment of the German brigade in Lithuania in 2027. The incoming government calls China an increasingly important challenge for Lithuania's foreign and security policy and promises to develop economic and cultural ties with Taiwan. The centre-left government was formed by three political parties: Social Democrats of Lithuania, In the Name of Lithuania and The Dawn of Nemunas. They have secured 86 seats in the Lithuanian parliament and they will run for the next 4 years. At least that's the plan.
Syrians continue to arrive at the Assad regime's notorious Sednaya prison in the Damascus countryside, looking for news of their missing loved ones. Our correspondent in Damascus, Oz Karaji, was on the scene and has this report.
Behind me is the notorious Sednaya prison in the Damascus countryside, where the regime of Bashar al-Assad is thought to have executed and tortured to death many thousands of civilian Syrian dissidents. Now there have been hundreds of civilians swarming here to try and find news of their loved ones who may have been imprisoned here. TVP World spoke to one such person who came here looking for his brother, who he believes had been imprisoned here for 11 years. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I came to Sednaya looking for my brother. He was detained in 2013. For 11 years he has been detained in Assad's prison. I came to look for him. I have been looking for him for 11 years. They took him wrongfully and oppressively. I swear by Allah, he never carried a weapon or did anything to deserve prison. I ask all people and all countries to help us look for our kids and young men and young women who have all been unjustly imprisoned by Assad.
Among the things TVP World found here at Sednaya was an industrial press that Syrians imprisoned here accused the regime of using to dispose of the corpses or even live human beings that were pressed using this industrial press, and then their bodies, according to these prisoners, were then thrown into vats of acid to dispose of the corpses. It looks very much like there has been an industrial level of human slaughter at this prison. Obviously these are war crimes and crimes against humanity that the international community now will need to move to try and preserve many of the documents found here. Unfortunately, many of the documents are strewn along the ground, along the floor, people searching through them after the prison was liberated just a few days ago. There are obviously very, very gut-wrenching scenes of even women and children being found in these prisons, being freed from these prisons, with many people here having been in prison for decades who didn't even know that the regime of Bashar al-Assad has fallen. So really, really difficult scenes here today in Sednaya prison as the work continues to try and begin the process of accountability against the Bashar al-Assad regime. It's Oz Kataji reporting from Damascus for TVP World.
On January 1st of 2025, Poland will take the presidency of the European Council. For Europe, this is the time of trial and decision. What challenges will the Polish government encounter during its presidency? Joining me now to take a better look at what is to come live in the studio is Ignacy Niemczycki, State Secretary at the Polish Prime Minister's office. Good evening and thank you for joining me here on the program.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure's all mine. So what's going to be the focus of Poland during its presidency? What will Poland push for to achieve among its European members?
So I think, not surprisingly, also watching the news, we'll be focusing and framing our discussions about the theme of security. I think it's quite clear with the situation that we have at our eastern border. It's quite clear with the threat of having a trade war between the US and China. It's quite clear with what is happening in the US that we need to focus on security here internally. But when we talk about security, we mean security in many different dimensions, and I'm sure we'll discuss all of them. But I think our goal during the presidency is really to focus on the security and also encourage other member states to have look similar to ours on what is happening around the world.
So how would you describe some of the biggest challenges? Because obviously you're going to look at different fields, and obviously we live in very challenging times, especially here in Europe. What do you think those challenges are going to be?
So I think, technically speaking, getting prepared for presidency is just looking for legislative files that are going, so different legislative initiatives. But there's also this possibility of facing situations that you haven't predicted. And I think we are exactly at this point when we see that there are possibilities of those situations, and I already mentioned some of them. I think the new US administration, we don't really know what to expect on a number of important issues. Then there's a question or the issue of China and how China will react to a rather assertive US trade policy. And obviously we have the topic of Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the situation on the front. So I think the presidency is there to organize the discussion between member states. But I think given what is happening in Berlin, given what is happening in Paris, there's also a lot of expectation that Warsaw will really be in the leading role and that will be able to keep the EU united.
So would you say that the outlook on Poland taking over the EU Council presidency is rather positive, especially in light of everything that's been happening over the past few months?
Well, I really think there's a big expectation for Poland to deliver. And I think all eyes are really right now on Warsaw. And we here in Poland, I don't think we really estimate properly what is the level of expectations. So I think most of the diplomats that I talk to are really optimistic about our presidency, but it will be definitely a challenge.
So it's very clear that security and defense are some of the topics on top of the agenda. How would you assess the dangers that the EU is facing as of now and it's prone in recent months and years?
Well, so I think the main issue here is that we're very reliant on supplies of weapons from other member states. So we need to be able to also secure ourselves with the industrial base in Europe.
So the development of the military industry.
Exactly. So, but how do we, the question here is...
How do we do it?
How do we do it? How do we finance it? But also, how do we do it without making our relation with the US worse? So how do we balance that?
It's a balancing act,
absolutely.
Definitely.
And I think that's the trick. And also, you know, financial discussions are always very, very difficult. And we have a lot of challenges. We also face another challenge, which is how to ensure that the European economy is innovative, that is competitive. So how do we find the money for defense as well?
So I would like to also stay on the topic of defense in terms of the military and the ongoing situation in Ukraine. When talking about defense, do you think that we have arrived at a point where Poland is, to a certain extent, going to take the lead among other EU members when it comes to security in Europe and, supporting Ukraine in its war efforts?
Well, I think for quite a long time already, we've been in the very leading role, advocating for Ukraine in the EU, and I think we've already sent a very strong signal when it comes to...
But do you think the presidency is going to push us even a step forward?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. And I think the presidency will be an important time for that. And also because we do have a stable pro-European democratic government here in Poland, that's the expectation, that we have the mandate to really focus on Ukraine.
Especially with everything that we've been seeing across some European states and some neighboring states in terms of recent election processes.
I think this issue of Ukraine will be crucial during the Polish presidency. But here again, we need to talk to the US, and we need to try and have a positive offer to the US as well.
It would be hard to overlook the French president's visit to Warsaw today and the talks with Mr. Tusk and our Polish president as well. During his meeting with Polish Prime Minister, we heard French President Emmanuel Macron. He pointed out that one of the major threats when it comes to Europe is Russia meddling with different processes, internal processes, not only in Europe but also in the neighboring countries. We've seen examples thereof, for example, during the elections in Moldova, in Romania, in Georgia. So what would you say, what's Poland's plan to tackle the issue of Russia meddling with internal business, so to speak, air quotes, and democratic processes?
So when I talked about security and different dimensions, this is exactly one of the dimensions of security, so-called information security. So this really is a discussion about how to tackle Russian disinformation, but also how to ensure that the disinformation from within is also tackled. How do we provide media literacy classes, how we work with education, how do we ensure that media outlets are strong.
The big tech.
And how do we contain the platforms without limiting economic potential? That's the trick as well. So I think we'll be having those important discussions, but I feel also that there is a true appetite, and Macron's visit confirmed that, to really do something bold during the Polish presidency.
I would like to also look at energy, because over the past few weeks, over the past few months, we heard that there is no defense without energy and there is no energy without defense. These two things, those are those topics, those subjects that are interconnected. Prime Minister Donald Tusk declared lowering the energy prices in Europe as one of the key goals of this presidency. How are you going to achieve it?
Well, it's a long-term plan, and there's absolutely no quick fix solution, and everybody around the table in Europe knows that. But it has a tremendous effect on the competitiveness of businesses here in Europe, so we have to tackle that. And so far, we've been mostly focused on the Green Deal, and what Poland is saying, that we cannot go with decarbonization by deindustrialization. We need to also create an environment in which industry can still thrive. So we really need to focus on energy prices. One of the aspects is also, important aspects is also getting rid of imports from Russia of oil and gas. We still see it in some...
We still see a lot of that happening among
exactly.
European countries.
So we have to deal with that and find an alternative. And here, again, I actually think the US might be helpful, because with the increase of LNG production in the US, that's really a perfect fit.
When we're talking about the decision-making process, when we're talking about the Polish presidency, we cannot forget about what some experts call it l'enfant terrible of Europe, Hungary. And I would like to ask you, how is EU and Poland during the presidency going to tackle the issue of Hungarian veto when it comes to the decision-making process?
Well, in a number of issues, we don't need every member state on board. And then finally, I think what is important when dealing with Hungary is the unity of other member states. So we've seen so far that if for a long time all the other member states really are united and press for something, then eventually Hungary will agree. So you've seen Viktor Orban leaving the room at some point to allow consensus. So I think it is doable. Probably there will be a price to pay, but I think we're really talking about
what's the
most
price?
basic. Well, the price will depend on the negotiations. So when we're discussing Ukraine, actually Orban has made it really clear that he wants the money from the EU budget, but the Commission is saying that we cannot provide the money from the so-called RRF because of rule of law issues in Hungary. So again, it's a balancing act. I think we'll also see a slight shift in the politics of Viktor Orban with Donald Trump and help in US.
He's been definitely trying to make some moves in order to appease.
Yeah. But I think in a way we'll need to have a positive offer to US, and in that regard, maybe I'm hopeful that maybe Orban will find himself in this positive offer, and that will encourage him to take some decisions together with the rest of the EU countries.
Our time is coming to an end, but last but not least, I wanted to ask you about the presidency generally and the decision-making process and implementing changes. We live in times, and the Polish presidency is going to fall on a very particular period of time. As you mentioned before, Donald Trump is going to be the 47th president. He's going to be sworn into office. We will soon see, we see a political turmoil in France when it comes to the government. We will also see elections in Germany. How likely do you think is it going to? How likely do you think it is that it's going to affect the decision-making process within the EU? So many moving pieces all together coming at the same time.
Well, that's what you have to be prepared for when taking over the presidency, and I think this is a thing that we are already planning for. There are some other unpredictable events of even grander scale, and think of the presidencies before us. Like how do you deal with the pandemic? This was something absolutely unprecedented. But dealing with member states where elections are happening, this is a constant factor when being in the role of the presidency. So we'll just have to go on.
We will have to go on indeed. Thank you so much for joining me. Ignacy Niemczycki, State Secretary at the Polish Prime Minister's office. It's a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Thank you, my pleasure.
And so this would be all the latest news for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned here on TVP World as we will be back in just a moment with more news and features.